Welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast, where we talk to C-level leaders from across the payments landscape. We'll be discussing the products and services that impact the payment space today, as well as trends and predictions for the future of payments. We will also hear stories from our guests about their journeys to the top.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast. I'm your host, Greg Myers, and on today's show, we have a very special guest, Oban MacTavish, the co-founder and CEO of Spade. So, Oban, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Greg. Great to meet you.
Great to meet you as well. So let's start off having you tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe where you're from, where you grew up, where you went to school, a few things like that.
Yeah, I'm Canadian, which is a fun place to start. I grew up really in Vancouver, but when I was a kid, I lived in San Francisco for a while as well. My story kind of starts when I'm pretty young, think like 13, 14. I started trading in the stock market, which is, I guess, a normal thing for 13, 14-year-olds to do with paper trading. I got my first job at 16 at a restaurant, so I could afford to trade like real stocks. I didn't have any money before that. And then went into college to study finance. I spent my summers at a tech company in the Bay Area in vertical SaaS. And then as I graduated, I was really kind of debating, do I want to become an investment banker, which is a lovely career, and then go off to a hedge fund or something like that. But I actually decided to start another company. So I started my first company right out of college. It was in vertical SaaS. The wealth management space. I like to say I was the co-founder focused on how you make money in vertical SaaS. I was one of four, sort of like the chief business officer for whatever kind of thing, if we had titles at that point. We did that for 2 years, raised like 600, 700K. And then COVID-19 meant that I had to make a pretty hard decision. Do I want to keep doing this? Do I want to move on? And I decided to move on. And some time away from starting a company, consulting for fintechs led to me to start Spade in November of 2021. So it's been a while now.
Okay, well, that's a good segue. So tell us what Spade does.
Yeah, at Spade, we provide what we like to call as real-time merchant intelligence to the card ecosystem. But what that really looks like in practice is that we take in card payment data generated by issuers, generally sent to them by the network or their processor, and enhance it with dramatically better information, whether that be firmographic data from a network of information we have that covers 99.9% of card accepting businesses in the US, insights generated by ourselves and partners, or any other information you'd want to use in the auth stream or afterwards to make a really informed decision or do something critical. So importantly, we are real time, like truly. Our P99 is under 50 milliseconds. So what that means is that every single transaction you send to us is going to get this enhanced information. And then our customers broadly, we work with 3 publicly traded companies, massive fintech customers like Stripe and others. And we really say, hey, we're going to help you do whatever is really important to you, whether that be fraud prevention, auth decisioning, payments optimization, rewards attribution. Really, we run the gambit of powering pretty much every critical piece of infrastructure a card issuer that leverages card data will build.
Okay. And are there specific industries or verticals that you have the solution built for?
Yeah. I mean, the beauty is we spend all of our time with anyone issuing a card, whether you're a consumer card program, a B2B card, small businesses, fleet fuel. Like the reality is if you issue a card, you should probably be working with us to better understand where your customers spend their money.
Okay. And you said the company started a couple years ago. How big is it now?
Yeah. So we raised our Series A in end of 2023. We're about 18 people today. So still very, very small, which is great. But we do work with, companies who are processing, over hundreds of billions of card payments every single year.
Okay. And is it US focused or global?
As of today, we operate in the US. We're really focused on working with US card issuers. Our data primarily covers US businesses. So that's really where we're focused. But we are expanding into Canada and other geographies this year.
And talk about maybe the business model. Is it SaaS-based or how do you price your service?
Yeah, we're consumption-based. So when we partner with issuers, they're sending us their entire stream of data. They're really trying to say, hey, like, who is this business or merchant that my customer is spending with? What do they do? We can flag their MCC code says they are, in fact, a restaurant, but we can tell you that they sell firearms or other sort of like higher risk materials. Or, even just that they're a gambling website, which really deserves a different sort of look from an agent or something like that. We price per transaction. So when card issuers come to us, they're paying us, fractions of a penny per card payment, and they're able to get this dramatically improved performance in their products.
Okay, great. So what would you say differentiates you guys from your competitors out there?
One of the biggest differences, and I'm sure you're familiar with other transaction enrichment vendors, people like Entropy or MX, Personetics, others that have been around for a really long time. The reality is that we do something a little different in that we're backed by real data. And what that means is we're using state registries and other information to give you verified and accurate information. It's not like, we just cleanse the name of this transaction and gave you a pretty logo. And the other piece is that we're able to operate in real time. As I said, our P99s are under 50 milliseconds, and we can even escalate to that. So what that means is that you can feel really comfortable leveraging our product in the auth stream. And I think that's a unique capability that really unlocks numerous high return on investment opportunities for issuers. Issuers have been paying for better data for a long time, but much of the time it's been for the purposes of like a user experience. But there's only so much you're willing to pay for that because it's just a cost center. We can actually help you stop more fraud. We can help you cut fraud losses. We can help you increase auth rates. Like we're really driving at really important KPIs for your business and helping you increase those outcomes.
Okay. So you mentioned a couple use cases there, fraud, auth. Are there other use cases that you haven't mentioned you want to talk about?
Yeah. I mean, card linked offers is a big one. If you're trying to have a reward scheme that's rewarding on, unique attributes or, it is regulated. So you can't claim you're giving someone 5% cash back and then not give them 5% cash back. And it's a massive cost center for issuers when they're dealing with, customer complaints and things like that. Our ability to give you this enhanced data means that your rewards are more accurate. You're paying out when you say you're going to be paying out. You can even sort of prove that you're generating these things more accurately. So it's really, we like to fall into like authorization, attribution, and then analytics. I think every single issuer is becoming more and more focused on deeply understanding their customer base. And so much of that is fueled by data. If you don't understand where your customers are spending, it's sort of the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. And that's becoming more and more important. It's actually a large opportunity we see with our customer base today.
So where do you see the industry headed, say, in the next 3 to 5 years?
It's one of the most interesting times to be working in payments ever. More than ever, we're seeing sort of novel and interesting approaches driven by increased demand in sort of the issuing space and on the acquiring side to say, hey, how can we improve everyone's outcomes? And like from our perspective, one of the biggest waves that we're excited about is direct merchant to issuer connectivity. Payments optimization. Card programs have been around for a really long time. We're getting better and better at stopping fraud. And fraud is always going to be a problem. But the question is often these days is not just how do you stop fraud, but also how do you let more of the good guys in? How do you make sure that the transactions that should be authorized are getting authorized? We really see ourselves as a core piece of the infrastructure there, driving increased payments acceptance rates for merchants by, improving the ability for banks to understand what they do. Beyond that, I think it's impossible to talk about payments without talking about, data and analytics and even things like AI. And one of the things we're really excited about is we're seeing more and more banks realize that and just fintech companies realize that the opportunity that presented in their data is massive. The better question is like, how do you make sure that data is usable, effective, valuable, clean, structured, et cetera? And I think there's a huge opportunity for us to ensure that like the data that these large issuers are leveraging is accurate and do so in a way that's PII free, in a way that's verified and accurate, because I think banks are built on trust. Issuers are really built on trust. And you want to make sure that, the data you're leveraging is high trust.
You kind of mentioned AI, which is something we always talk about. The other thing that often comes up, it kind of came up a few years ago and then kind of went quiet, but the whole crypto and all that kind of space and maybe alternative forms of payment besides card, kind of how do you see that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we spent a lot of time talking about alternative forms of payment. Obviously, in some ways, I'm selling my own book, but I don't think cards are ever going away. So many of the protections that are built in that we as consumers take for granted, whether it be charging back or the fact that really like your bank is oftentimes responsible for making sure there's like dollars to clear, especially in a credit type situation. But we are, exploring and launching soon ways of ingesting and working with, data forms outside of cards. We're not touching the crypto universe, but we are touching things like RTP, ACH, wires, et cetera. Spade is fundamentally built on the idea that we should understand more about our payments data and whether that be a card or another form of payment. I think it's important that we're going to be able to assist our customers there. I do think that in some ways, as I've spent more and more time in payments, I think every time a new form of payment appears, I think people forget the enormous amount of infrastructure that exists around older forms of payments. We all take for granted the fact that these chargeback rights and things like that for cards, and we're saying, oh my God, look how much cheaper a stable coin is, or look how much more affordable RTP is. But the reality is that's because many of these protections or pieces of infrastructure that your bank and broadly you or the merchant are paying for don't exist yet. So I think there's going to be a convergence of the price of many of these things. There's only you can even see it right now in the baked in price for some of these new crypto products coming out of the PSPs, where they're being priced at it's not free. I think the assumption is like, there's some price that comes out at, but that price is potentially going to go up. Even if it starts really low and there's a huge gap, processing is an incredibly efficient industry. There's certainly middlemen, but any of these middlemen are actually, there's a huge competition to drive prices lower and lower. So you end up in these situations where prices will likely rise for many of these services, but I think it's a good thing. the more competition we have for our dollars and where we process is, the better.
And I would assume, since it's kind of, card issuer based, the B2B side is just as important as the consumer side.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So what would maybe a use case on the B2B side, what would they use the data for to, obviously fraud and auth we talked about, but are there other B2B use cases?
Absolutely. It's in a case study we released with Mercury, but a big area of excitement was real-time categorization for P&Ls. So if you're a business, you're offering like a B2B card, a big feature that people are wanting is like, hey, how can I close my books faster? And one of the things we offer is accurate categorization. We can tell you, hey, this is Facebook ads. We can tell you this is businesses like trucking repairs, you know what I mean? And all that feeds back into models that generate P&L codes, general ledger codes for people to then close their books faster. And again, it just built on that core of like, we have this data, it's a messy asset. We can turn it into this really clean, structured, accurate information that you can feed to become a feature. Or vendor locked cards or category locked cards. A good example, another thing is also geographic locked cards. We work with Corpay, the largest B2B MasterCard issuer in the United States. And if we look at the logistics industry as a whole, there's huge opportunity in saying, hey, how can we help stop fuel fraud? You look at a truck, you know where it is. Now I'm telling you where the gas station is. Are they matching up? Do we think this is fraud? Do we want to send a push note and say, hey, actually, is this actually you? Are you making this payment? Is the truck in the garage and you're saying you're filling up $1,000? Like, these are real problems getting solved by our data every single day. And for us, those are a handful of B2B use cases that are really applicable we see.
And you mentioned the PII and that kind of, the security side of the data. So maybe touch on that, because I think that's important for everyone to understand kind of the security around it, the protections that you guys put in place to make sure that data is protected.
So I think the beauty of it is we don't actually have any PII. We require no PII to be sent to us for us to operate. So we operate in a PII-free environment. Stipulated in our contracts, don't send us those information. Like, we don't need any bins or pans we don't need any tokenized payment information. We're really focused on that non-identifying merchant-focused information that comes out of the auth stream. Regardless, though, we're SOC 2 compliant. Security is in our blood. Every single time we're working with a large enterprise, we go through hundreds and hundreds of questionnaires, pen tests, et cetera, to make sure that we run a really secure ship. And, if you're working in payments, I think security has to be top of mind at all times, because, you don't want to become a fraud vector for somebody.
Okay. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about you. So give us a little bit of your kind of professional journey and why you started the company, how you started it, and give us that little bit of professional journey.
The only other job I've ever had in starting companies is working as an intern at as a tech company in the Bay Area in college. So I don't know, professional journey is a little bit of it's a very generous way of describing it. But I think from my perspective, I was always driven by doing things that, learning and doing things that were really challenging. And when I looked at sort of what I wanted to do after school, starting a company just made sense. It was an interesting, I had the opportunity to try. I'm so lucky to have had a second opportunity. So, for me, it really started as like a belief in wanting to build something really interesting. I fell in love with Silicon Valley when I lived in San Francisco during my summers in college. And it was like, wow, there's you can just do things, you can just wake up and say, I'm going to try to build a company. And if you're lucky enough, and if you sometimes put in the work, you can end up in a position where you're really, changing an industry or building something great. And I think for me, I'm just feel so lucky to be able to have the opportunity to build something like Spade and work with incredible people every single day to solve real problems for, massive, massive companies.
Okay. So how did Spade come about? What's the startup story?
I think Spade, when I left my first company, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, as many people do, especially during COVID, a lot of time for introspection. And I was consulting for fintech companies to help pay my bills. Like, literally, I had just moved in with my then girlfriend, now wife, in our first ever apartment together. And, I had very little money to my name, and it was COVID-19. So I had even fewer job prospects at the time. And I was consulting for people in fintech, trying to be like, hey, I met a lot of people in my last job. Like, hey, do you need help doing business development, building pitch decks, talking about your product, like messaging, whatever you want. Just like, hey, pay me a little money, pay my rent, et cetera. I kept hearing the same problem. Everyone's like, our data sucks. Like, the data we were promised or being given by our, whether it be like a banking as a service player, super modern one like Marqeta or Galileo or Unit, or, something on the, an old school one like an I2C, like the reality is the data sucks. And I just confounded me. I was like, I don't understand. Why is this the case? This has been around for so long. How is it that a bank doesn't understand where we're actually spending our money? Like, that just like makes no sense to me. And I started digging and realized, there was a huge opportunity. I mean, this is powering, one of the largest profit pools in the entire planet, financial services, and all of its bad data. Is just crazy to me. And what started as a small API that would clean a transaction and give you a logo became, something that gave you more business information, became, where we are today, a real data network that shares really valuable information with banks in real time. So I think it was very much driven by I wish there was some my last company, I saw the pain myself, but it really was just talking to people and being like, wait a second, this seems ridiculous. And if I don't do it, someone else will.
Right. Okay, great. What are your passions in life? So maybe one business related passion and one personal passion.
Personally, I think I love to cook. And I definitely, so my wife is an incredible baker. Me, I'm okay. I'm really passable. But oftentimes, something we do is I'll cook a meal and she'll have made dessert or something like that. But I think it's really cooking is something that I wish I could do more of. And I definitely did more of when I was younger in college. You can take time to make really fancy, molecular gastronomy, crazy things, invest all that time, hours and hours and hours and hours, braising things. And then, you get a little older and you're like, I don't have time. You got to take the dog out. You got to go to work. But I think cooking is definitely a personal passion of mine. And then work. I mean, I think I feel so lucky to be working in payments. It sounds silly, but I didn't come from a payments background, But you get into this industry where not only is it a relatively small industry, which is incredible. You meet the same people. You build these really incredible friendships and relationships so there's a shared passion around what you do, which is great. But I think it's the biggest game on the planet. And all of the rules are being set by in the cards, at least the networks. So there's standardized rules and we're all playing in it. And incentives are very clear. And I think it's very interesting to play in what almost feels like a human-made environment versus some other markets. If you're in, oil and gas, you gotta find a lot of that's your playing field is the planet, which is very natural. Payments is a human-driven, human-created environment, and we're all sort of playing by these rules and trying to optimize and create value for people. And I think that's just feel so lucky to be working in that every single day.
Yeah, and you're one of those that fell into payments and then can't get out, right?
Exactly.
That's what happens.
It doesn't happen often.
Yeah, that's what happened to me. I wasn't looking for a job in payments, but 20 years ago started at JP Morgan Chase, and here I am doing a podcast going on the 6th year about payments. So it's kind of crazy. So one more question. So someone comes to you, maybe they're right out of college, and they say, Oban, what do I need to do to be successful in payments? How do I build my career here in payments and fintech? What advice would you give them?
I think curiosity is just so important in payments and fintech and in entrepreneurship. But I think in payments in particular, it is a small enough industry that people know more than you if they've been around for a lot longer than you. I think having a humble and very curious attitude allows you to learn because people are willing to share information. As someone who did stumble in, and someone who's been in it for, under 10 years, under 5 years even, I know I have so much to learn. And I really try to remain curious. And I think in payments in particular, being willing to just admit you don't know or ask questions or ask why things have been doing them, because there are people who have been doing this for far longer than, depending on how old you are, you've been alive, or certainly how long you've been in the industry, and remaining humble and curious about their perspectives and why things are the way they are, because it's easy coming in from the outside to say, oh, it's all broken, none of it works. And as you peel back the layers, oh, this is why this is the way it is. And as much as you want to sort of rip it all down and start from the ground up, I think being humble and curious about why things are the way they are help you inform your path forward and how you can change the industry and improve the industry, while still realizing that some things aren't going to change, and the reason they are for a really good reason that might not have been evident to you because you've only been in payments for 2 years.
Yeah, I think curiosity is great advice to stay curious, especially like you said in this industry. So, Oban, we've covered a lot of ground about you and the company and the industry as a whole. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about before we wrap up?
I think the only thing that is interesting from my perspective, or at least the topic, is on the AI thing. I think we spend a lot of time with banks, spend a lot of time with fintech, and it's very interesting to see payments broadly, something so built on trust, is trying to wrestle with the idea of how can we make AI work in an industry where the mistakes are so costly. The customer success example is great. It's great. Okay, perfect. You have this bot that will talk to people, but there are regulations that if your bot promised something to someone, you're going to be held accountable. And I think I get so interested in seeing how the banking industry broadly, but all payments companies can adopt some of these very modern cutting edge AI tools, because I think it's clear everyone sees the value, but it's not quite clear who the buck stops with. As consumers, we love the idea of getting access to these things and the seamlessness of talking to something, having it done. But we also really hate the bad outcomes in payments. I mean, at the micro scale, it's like, well, why did my card get declined? You're pissed. People change banks. Like you talk to someone, they're like, yeah, my card got declined 3 or 4 times. I literally walked away. That's crazy. But that's the reality of the industry we work in. So mistakes are so costly. So I get really excited, and I don't know if I have a great answer, but I'm very curious to see where the industry goes and the adoption, because I think everyone is excited by the idea, but everyone's very cautiously approaching because no one really knows what happens when things go wrong yet. And I find that very fascinating.
Yeah, I have really started to get into AI and trying to understand actual use cases. And I always, as I'm talking to people like you and other CEOs of payments companies, and it's like everyone knows the value. It's just kind of bringing that to life around this regulated industry, to your point, that I think can be a little bit challenging. I think everyone gets there's marketing use cases and there's fraud use cases and data use cases, and those all make sense. But then, what else is there that you can do with it, and how do you do it in a way that remains compliant and within these rules and regulations that we have as an industry? So it's going to be interesting. I think there's going to be, a lot more that's going to come out over time, and we'll see. But it's a great topic, I think.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for taking the time.
Yeah, Oban, thank you so much for being here. I know your time is very valuable. So again, thank you so much for being on the show.
Great.
And to all you listeners out there, I thank you for your time as well. Until the next story.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Leaders in Payments podcast. Make sure you visit our website at leadersinpayments.com, where you can subscribe to the show and where you'll find our show notes. If you enjoyed listening, please share on your social channels as well.